I sat in my car for 23 minutes before I could start the engine. The courthouse steps were still visible in the rearview mirror, blurry from the drizzle, or maybe from the tears I refused to let fall. I had walked out of that building stripped of everything. Not just the marriage, not just the name, but the dignity I had spent a decade carefully upholding. They called me a gold digger in open court. His lawyer didn't even flinch. She contributed nothing but a last name and some shopping receipts. I remember the smirk on my mother-in-law's face as he said it. Cold, proud, as if this had been the plan all along. I didn't speak. What was I supposed to say? That I gave up my job offers to make space for his ambitions. That I rewrote my life to fit theirs every lunch, every photo op, every board dinner, dressed like a brand asset. No one wanted the truth. They wanted the story, the archetype, the greedy wife who married for status and left with dollar signs in her eyes. And they got exactly what they came for. The prenup I signed, handwritten in love, not read in fear, sealed everything. My condo tied to the trust, my savings drained during the separation. My name already being erased from donor lists and board memberships before the judge even hit the gavel. My access to the family foundation's back end revoked. That morning I was still a Whitaker. By lunch I was no one. But it wasn't just the legal erasure that broke me. It was the silence. The deliberate stillness with which they watched me fall. My so-called sisters-in-law, who once kissed my cheek, at brunch wouldn't meet my eyes. My friends, well, the ones I thought were mine, had gone quiet weeks ago, replying less and less than not at all. I was no longer useful. And in that world, useless meant invisible. It was humiliating. No one screamed. No one cursed. They didn't need to. Their victory was written in their restraint. The judge called it final. Clean split, he said. But nothing about it felt clean. It felt like I had been slowly carved out of a life I helped build. A slow, silent dismemberment that left no blood, only absence. I sat there in the car, fingers clenched around the steering wheel, trying to remember who I was before them, before the Whitaker name, before the fundraisers and black-tie charity circuits, before I was taught how to be agreeable, tasteful, quiet. I used to be sharp. I used to be ambitious. I used to dream in numbers and strategy, not centerpieces and guest lists. But you forget those things when you live in someone else's house long enough. You start to feel grateful for the floor beneath your feet, even when they remind you it's not yours. My phone buzzed beside me, a single notification, email, from their estate accountant. Subject final notice, access revoked. That was it. No goodbyes, no explanations. Just a cold, automated severance. I stared at the screen for a long time, not angry, not yet. But something had shifted. I thought of all the nights I stayed up helping Alex prep for quarterly reviews. All the hours I spent proofreading investor decks, attending dry rehearsals, giving advice I was told never to claim credit for. And now I was disposable, deleted with one signature. But even in that silence, there was something oddly stabilizing. Like standing in the eye of a storm and hearing your own heartbeat again. That's what it felt like, my breath, my thoughts suddenly mine again. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have money, but I had something else memory. I remembered everything. Every password he made me manage. Every folder I was trusted to organize. Every conversation they thought I was too dumb or too quiet to understand. They thought I had nothing left. They were wrong. There was a time I truly believed I belonged in that family. Not because of the money or the name, but because I thought love was enough. I met Alex when we were both 24. I was an analyst at a mid-tier investment firm, working 70-hour weeks and living off instant noodles and almond milk lattes. He was effortless, tall, charismatic, born with a last name that could open any door in New York. But he never made me feel small, not then. He showed up to our second date with a folder of my published papers highlighted. Asked about my views on portfolio balancing like it was foreplay. I laughed so hard, I nearly spilled wine on his custom shoes. I should have known then that real men don't come that polished unless they're trained. But I was too busy being seen. For the first time, I wasn't just the smart girl in the corner. I was someone he listened to. Or so I thought. His mother, Eleanor Whitaker, didn't speak to me until our 5th meeting. She studied me like a gallery piece, silent, expressionless, then smiled with a tilt of approval. "She's elegant," she told Alex. "She won't embarrass us." That was the first time I realized I was being assessed, not accepted, but I mistook it for tradition, for formality, for the way old money guards its gates. Alex proposed in the conservatory of the family estate in Connecticut. Candlelight jazz in the background, his grandmother's ring passed down for the right woman. I said yes without breathing, without thinking about prenups or power dynamics, or the strange tightness in Eleanor's hug that night. I was in love, and I thought they were giving me a home. The first few years were a dream. I moved into the Whitaker brownstone, decorated my office to keep working, though I rarely used it. They said it was too stressful for a young wife, that I should enjoy this phase and let the men handle the pressure. I was flattered. At first, I traded spreadsheets for foundation dinners, high-yield bonds for hostess seating charts, but I kept telling myself it was temporary, that I was building something invisible, loyalty, trust, legacy. Eleanor started including me in planning meetings for the family trust, not for input, of course. But I sat in, I watched, I listened, I made notes. They didn't know I understood every number they glossed over, that I could see which accounts were being moved, which taxes were being dodged, which foundations were real, and which were shells. I kept quiet. Because that's what a good wife did. She observed, she remembered. It wasn't all performance. There were moments, soft, unscripted ones, where I thought maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in this. When Alex would pull me into his lap after a long dinner and whisper, "Couldn't have done it without you." When he asked me to rewrite his investor letters because he liked the way I made the words sound smart but warm, those were the moments I stored away, like a private currency I could count on when things felt cold. And yet, the cracks were always there, little things. Being left out of family photos for symmetry. Being called the pretty one by board members, never the capable one. The way Alex never introduced me by my former title, just as his wife, his +1, his girl. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need validation, that I was building something bigger than a career. But the hardest part, I believed in the Whitakers. I believed in legacy, in long dinners and old books and trust fund ethics that sounded noble in theory. I thought we were preserving something important, that our life meant more than status, more than control. It's laughable now how far I bent myself to fit into their world. I changed my wardrobe, my tone, even my hair sleeker, less curly, more refined. I started editing myself in conversation, using softer words, smiling more in silence. Not because they told me to, but because I thought that's what love required. Adaptation. I told myself that if I gave enough, they'd see me. Not as an outsider they tolerated, but as one of them. I didn't know then that they never intended to see me at all. It didn't happen all at once. That's what made it so cruel. The unraveling was slow, almost imperceptible. A misplaced glance, a dinner I wasn't invited to, a memo I forgot to receive. At first, I thought I was imagining it. That maybe I'd offended someone without realizing. Maybe Eleanor didn't like the charity I'd pitched to the board. Maybe Alex was under too much stress, and I was reading too much into his clipped tone. I tried harder, smiled more, hosted better, learned which board members preferred which vintage, which dessert made Eleanor sigh with approval, which phrases made Alex proud in front of guests. I stayed useful, but usefulness only gets you so far when the rooms are closing around you. The real shift began when Alex's younger sister Harper returned from Geneva. Harper had always been the wild card, the so-called rebel, who backpacked through Europe with luxury luggage and posted filtered activism from wine bars in Madrid. But she was a Whitaker, which meant her recklessness was charming. Mine, even imagined, would be scandalous. She took over strategic communications for the family trust, a title as vague as it was dangerous. And suddenly, I wasn't copied on weekly briefs anymore. The event planning meetings moved to Tuesday mornings the same time as my standing therapy appointment, when Eleanor herself had insisted I keep. Subtle exclusions, paper cuts. I tried to talk to Alex about it. He nodded sympathetically, kissed my temple, and said, "Don't overthink it, babe. They just like to move fast." But fast didn't explain why my access to the Foundation's financial portal was downgraded to read only, or why Eleanor asked the estate lawyer to start reviewing my legal footprint within the trust routine audit she claimed, or why Harper started introducing me at functions as the heart of our family instead of our financial steward like she used to. They were rewriting me in real time while I stood there smiling. The staff began answering to Harper instead of me. My catering requests were changed without my approval. Vendors started invoicing someone else. I began to feel like a guest in a house I used to run. I would walk through the kitchen and hear laughter stop. Hear my name in a whisper. Feel the weight of performance in every conversation. The housekeeper Mila once gently touched my arm as I passed and said, "Sometimes the tide shifts before we see the storm." I didn't know what she meant then. I do now. The worst of it wasn't the exclusion. It was the gaslighting. The way Alex would tilt his head and ask, "Are you okay? You seem off lately," as if I were unraveling not the fabric of my world, as if the erosion I felt in my bones was just a mood. I started second-guessing myself. Was I being paranoid sensitive? Had I become the overbearing wife who saw betrayal in every shadow? That's the thing about manipulation, you start to wear it like a second skin. Even when Harper publicly undermined me at a gala correcting me on stage over a donor's figures, I knew by heart I apologized. To her. Later that night, Alex said I handled it with grace. I smiled and thanked him, but inside I wanted to scream. Not because she embarrassed me, but because he let her. And because deep down I knew it wasn't just Harper. It was all of them. I began to keep notes. Quietly. Not out of vengeance, at least not then, but out of survival. Every discrepancy in the reports, every shift in signature access, every email rerouted. I wasn't sure what I was collecting. I just knew I was being erased piece by piece. And if I didn't hold on to something, I'd forget who I was before they made me doubt it. By year 8, I no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. She was elegant, yes, still polished, still composed. But her eyes no longer asked questions. They just waited for instructions. And the worst part, no one had to raise their voice. No one had to lock a door. They simply stopped opening them. It was a Tuesday morning when I found the envelope. Plain white, no logo, no return address. Just sitting on my desk in the study where I used to prepare quarterly summaries for Alex before they became too complex for me. I almost missed it, tucked beneath the newspaper I hadn't read in weeks. There was no note, no handwriting, just a single printed spreadsheet and a red circled line item that didn't belong. A wire transfer, $1.8 million. From the Whitaker Foundation to a shell corporation I'd never seen before, routed through a Cayman intermediary. My breath caught. I recognized the format. It was the same report layout I used to prepare, the same formatting, the same naming convention. But this version wasn't for public eyes. This was the internal trail, the version that showed where the money actually went, not where they said it did. I froze, not from shock, from confirmation. I had always suspected things weren't clean. Eleanor had a way of calling certain donations strategic disbursements. Harper once laughed about turning generosity into equity. Alex said that's how smart legacy families operate. But I told myself it was coded language ambiguous, yes, but not criminal. And now here it was, in black and white. Not a hint, a breach. And someone had left it for me. I didn't know who or why, but I knew this whoever gave it to me wanted me to see what I was too blind or too loyal to look at myself. I didn't confront Alex right away. I couldn't. I needed to be sure. So I started digging, quietly. I accessed old backups, used passwords I was never supposed to have remembered. I cross-referenced timelines, donor files, tax documents. And with every file I opened, the truth screamed louder. The Whitaker Foundation wasn't just corrupt. It was laundering money. Using charitable fronts, foreign intermediaries, and grant-making loopholes, to reroute funds into shell companies, some connected to Eleanor's consulting firm, others to Harper's equity venture, and worst of all too, traced back to accounts under Alex's name. Accounts that were opened during our marriage, under our joint address. Which meant if it came to light, I wouldn't just be humiliated, I'd be implicated. That night, I sat across from Alex at dinner. He poured me wine, smiled, asked if I'd heard about the art auction next week. His voice was calm, confident, a man in total control. I studied him the way someone studies a photograph of someone they used to know. I realized I didn't hate him, not yet. But something inside me had already left the room. I found a transfer from the foundation, I said carefully. 1.8 million, Cayman route. His fork froze midair. It lasted a second, maybe less, but I saw it, the flicker, the recalibration. He smiled. That's internal strategy. Eleanor's team is handling a property exchange completely above board. I nodded. Sure, just odd it didn't show up in the audited report. He set his fork down. You've been under a lot of stress lately. There it was, the pivot, the narrative. You're starting to see ghosts where there are none. He added gently as if he were soothing a child. The next day, my login credentials were disabled. 2 days later, I received a letter delivered, not emailed, from the family lawyer. I was being removed from all administrative roles within the trust effective immediately. No explanation, no due process, just a signature. Alex didn't say a word, not that day, not the next. We went about our routine smiles in public silence in private. It was as if nothing happened, as if I had imagined it all, until the board dinner. They held it at the Peninsula rooftop, same as every quarter. Normally, I would have been seated beside Alex, introduced as our financial conscience, or the sharpest voice at the table. But this time, my name wasn't on the place cards. I stood at the entrance in a black dress, clutching my purse, heart pounding. The hostess looked up. I'm sorry, ma'am. This is a private event. Alex appeared behind me, hand gently on my back. She's with me, he said, voice smooth. The hostess stepped aside. We walked in together. But when we reached the table, there were only 11 seats, and I wasn't one of them. He kissed my cheek, whispered, "Be home before midnight," and walked away toward his family, toward his empire, toward a table where I no longer existed. I left without looking back. That night, I checked the shared calendar we still used to coordinate travel. Alex had a weekend booked in Florence. I opened the itinerary. 2 passengers, her name Harper Whitaker. It wasn't just embezzlement, it was betrayal in blood. And suddenly, I wasn't sad anymore. I was awake. I wish I could say I walked away with fire in my chest and vengeance in my eyes, that I left that rooftop dinner knowing exactly who I was and what I'd do next. But I didn't. I stumbled home in silence, kicked off my shoes, sat on the floor, and stared at the wall for hours, too numb to cry. That night, something inside me died quietly. Not the pain that stayed, but the version of me who kept hoping that Alex would see me again, that Eleanor would soften, that Harper's cruelty was just insecurity. I'd been clinging to ghosts, trying to negotiate with people who had already decided I was disposable. When I woke the next morning, the world didn't care. Emails poured in, most of them unsubscribes alerts that I had been removed from this board, that committee, that private access. My name was quietly vanishing from the systems I had once helped build. By noon, my phone rang. A call from my alma mater's fellowship board. I had been asked to pause all public representation of the foundation until further clarification of my status. The same people who once invited me to speak about women and wealth now treated me like a scandal waiting to unfold. I checked the news. Nothing had broken yet, but I could feel it coming. Rumors, whispers, social media speculation. I was no longer a wife, no longer a partner, no longer welcome. I drove to the brownstone one last time. My access card didn't work. Mila, the housekeeper, let me in through the side entrance, her hands trembling. They told us not to open the door, she whispered. Said you might come back angry. Angry, I wasn't even allowed the dignity of rage. I packed what I could, books, journals, a few dresses that hadn't already been inventoried into marital property. Alex wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. He was probably in Florence, or preparing statements, or celebrating. It didn't matter. I moved into a friend's spare room. Not even a friend, really a former colleague from my analyst days, who still respected the woman I used to be. Her name was Jenna. She offered me space without questions, and I took it like a drowning person takes a breath. That first week, I barely ate, slept in spurts, flinched every time my phone buzzed. I kept expecting a final blow, some public humiliation I hadn't seen coming. But instead, there was only silence, a deafening surgical silence. The kind designed not to punish, but to erase. I tried to reach out to the foundation accountant who had once called me the most precise brain in the room, to the board assistant I'd trained personally, to the family's attorney who had once said I had the sharpest eyes for blind spots. None of them replied, not one. I was a liability now. Proximity to me meant risk. Sympathy meant disloyalty. They didn't even need to destroy me. They just had to wait until I disappeared on my own. I started questioning everything. Was I really that naive? Did I ever matter to them, or was I just decoration with credentials? A placeholder until they found someone more pliable, more loyal, more theirs. There was a night, late, cold, silent, when I sat in Jenna's kitchen, staring at a bottle of wine I hadn't opened. I thought about my parents, about how proud they had been when I married into a family like the Whitakers, about how I hadn't spoken to them in 3 years because Eleanor believed distance builds mystique, about how I had let myself become a stranger to everyone who once knew me. That was the real heartbreak, not the money, not the titles, the forgetting. How easily I let them make me forget who I was. But somewhere between that wine bottle and the 5th sleepless night, a thought settled in my chest, small, sharp, and stubborn. I knew the truth about the transfers, about the shell companies, about the foundation fraud. And whether the world knew me or not, they remembered what I had seen. I wasn't just an ex-wife. I was a witness, a dangerous one. And they had made the fatal mistake of underestimating a woman with nothing left to lose. There's a stillness that comes after devastation. It doesn't feel like peace. It feels like being buried alive, aware but buried. And in that stillness, I started to rebuild, not my life, not yet, but my mind, my clarity, my leverage. I spent the first week cataloging everything I had, every document, every message, every login I remembered. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I knew I had to start somewhere. I returned to habits I hadn't touched in years. Color-coded spreadsheets, time-stamped notes, cross-referenced source links. Jenna joked that I looked like I was back in war room mode. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. I wasn't planning revenge. I was tracing the outlines of my erasure, and in those outlines I began to find power. I contacted a friend from my analyst days, Liam. He worked at a compliance firm now focused on corporate accountability. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I asked for coffee, he showed up the next morning. He looked at me carefully, like someone approaching a fallen monument. I showed him only a fraction of what I had. His expression changed. "Rachel, if even half of this is traceable," he said, "this isn't just internal fraud, it's federal." That was the first time in weeks I felt anything close to solid ground. I didn't rush. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten lawsuits or media leaks. That's what they expected. That's how the Whitakers had trained the world to react to conflict with noise. But I had learned. Power doesn't yell. It whispers where it matters. I reached out to a white-collar attorney, a quiet one, female, former SEC. She didn't ask why I wanted a private consult. She just asked for details. I gave her a folder. She asked me one question. "Do you want protection or accountability?" "Both," I said. What followed was methodical, strategic, cold. She advised me to document intent to show that I had attempted to notify internal auditors. So I did. I sent one formal inquiry to the foundation email addressed to their oversight committee, asking for clarification on recent transfers and offering to assist in reconciling figures. No reply. 2 weeks later, I submitted a private report through my attorney to the Office of the Inspector General. Not a press leak, not a scandal, just a sealed whistleblower file complete with time-stamped data trails and names I never thought I'd be strong enough to write down. Eleanor, Harper, Alex. I expected to feel vindicated. I didn't. I felt tired, but I also felt clean. While the agencies began their review, I disappeared. Not in the dramatic sense, but socially, digitally, visibly. I shut down every account, cut every tie. I stopped trying to explain myself. I realized I didn't owe anyone a version of me they never cared to understand in the first place. I read, walked, relearned how to cook for one. Jenna offered to take me out every weekend. I said no until one Saturday I said yes. We went to a bookstore. The clerk called me ma'am and had no idea who I was, no whispers, no glances, no curated role to perform. Just a woman in jeans and a scarf, browsing without expectation. I went home and cried, not because I was sad, but because I was free. In that freedom, I found something terrifying silence that didn't hurt. I was finally alone, and it wasn't punishment, it was possibility. Then came the call. It wasn't from Alex or Eleanor, it was from a federal investigator. "We'd like to speak to you formally," he said. "You're not under investigation, but your knowledge of internal operations is substantial." They didn't call me a gold digger, they called me a credible source. That night I slept soundly for the first time in months. I had no plan to go back. But I knew this much: if the Whitakers had built their legacy on deception, and if their empire started to shake, I wouldn't be watching from the sidelines. I'd be standing exactly where they tried to bury me. I didn't know when the storm would hit, but I knew it was coming. And when it did, it didn't start with headlines or press conferences. It began with silence, strategic surgical silence, the kind that spreads in legal circles before it ever touches the news. One morning, my attorney forwarded me a notice. A federal inquiry had been opened into the Whitaker Foundation and associated entities with preliminary findings, indicating potential misuse of philanthropic assets. The language was careful, but between the lines I saw it, the empire was cracking. Then the calls started. First from numbers I didn't recognize, then from names I hadn't heard in months. Former colleagues, board advisors, family office managers, each one echoing a version of the same sentence we didn't know. We didn't realize. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. They hadn't known because they didn't want to. The Whitakers scrambled. Eleanor issued a public statement within a week, calling the accusations politically motivated. Harper wiped her social media. Alex stayed quiet. His silence said everything. Then came the petition, filed quietly, from the Foundation's interim legal counsel. They were requesting court approval to restructure the trust, a desperate move meant to limit damage, consolidate control, and name a new temporary overseer while the investigation unfolded. They thought they'd appoint someone compliant, internal, safe, but the court had other ideas. Because of the depth and clarity of my documentation, because of the evident retaliation I'd faced, because of my prior involvement in financial oversight, I was appointed as temporary fiduciary supervisor of the Whitaker Trust. The same system that once erased me now and placed me at its helm. The irony wasn't lost on me. The announcement came through a sealed court order, then leaked strategically, I suspect. It didn't make front-page news, but in the world that mattered, it was thunder. The woman they branded a gold digger was now legally responsible for approving or rejecting every financial move of the legacy that had once cast her out. I arrived at the Whitaker Foundation office, not as a guest, but with a badge. Their security guard didn't recognize me. He asked who I was there to see. "I'm here to oversee the audit," I said calmly. "You can call legal if you'd like." His hands shook. Upstairs, their executive assistant, Claire, who once reassigned my email account without a word, stood as I entered the boardroom. "Ms. Whitaker," she began out of habit. I held her gaze. "I don't use that name anymore." She nodded and sat. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I presented my paperwork, outlined my plan, and began my review. Every file, every report, every grant I was once excluded from, I examined them without flinching. They watched in silence, unsure how to treat me, too ashamed to apologize, too afraid to challenge me. Eleanor arrived late, draped in pearls, poised as always. She took the only seat across from mine. "For the sake of family," she said, "I hope you'll be fair." I met her eyes. "For the sake of law," I replied, "I'll be thorough." She didn't speak again. I initiated a third-party audit, froze all discretionary disbursements, flagged 8 prior transactions for legal review, one of them directly tied to Alex's offshore accounts. I didn't say a word to him. I let the evidence speak. And when the board finally asked if I intended to remain on long-term, I said no. My role was not to rebuild what they broke. My role was to make sure they never broke it again. I recommended the trust be transitioned into a public benefit foundation, with external oversight rotating independent auditors and full transparency. I submitted my resignation effective at the end of the audit cycle. They couldn't stop it because I had nothing left to take and everything to protect. When I walked out of that building, no one applauded, but they stood, not because they respected me, but because they couldn't afford not to. I didn't announce my resignation. There was no press release, no statement, no dramatic farewell in the boardroom. I simply closed the audit report, signed the final compliance note, and sent an encrypted copy to the federal investigator who first believed me. Then I turned off the lamp in the office they'd once kept locked from me and walked away. Some endings don't need noise, just distance. I returned the security badge in silence. The receptionist didn't meet my eyes. She'd started at the foundation 2 years after I'd been exiled. She didn't know the history, but she looked at me like someone looking at a name they were told not to speak too loudly. It didn't matter. My name had already done its work. Jenna picked me up outside. Her old Corolla still smelled like coffee and ambition. She didn't ask questions. She just handed me a muffin and said, "So what's next?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. And for once, I didn't need to. I spent the next few weeks in motion. Not to escape, just to breathe. I drove upstate, read books in diners, walked by rivers, watched strangers laugh in parks, and felt the strange weight of nothing. No events to plan, no damage, to undo, no role to defend. Just time. I started writing, not a memoir, not a tell-all, just words, about legacy, about women who are told they owe their silence in exchange for security, about how easily power rewrites truth if no one's left to testify. I didn't know if I'd publish it, but every sentence felt like another inch of skin I'd taken back. Then one afternoon, I received a letter. Handwritten. No name, just a crest embossed in gold. The Whitaker seal. Inside a single sheet of thick ivory paper. I regret that we failed to protect you when you were one of us. I see now that you were never trying to take anything. You were the only one trying to build something. Signed Harper, no apology, just recognition. I stared at the note for a long time. I didn't cry, didn't rage. I folded it, slid it into a drawer, and moved on. I bought a small place downtown. Nothing flashy, just mine. For the first time in years, I decorated without a committee. No themes, no approval, just linen curtains and real plants and books I actually read. Sometimes I caught myself expecting a knock on the door, a subpoena, a new betrayal. But it never came, because they had nothing left to take, only something to remember. Months later, I ran into Alex. It was at a gallery opening, not his kind of scene. But legacy families love to linger around culture, especially when rebuilding their name. He looked older, not tired, just thinner in spirit. He saw me, paused, walked over slowly. "Rachel," he said. I looked at him not with anger, not with nostalgia, just clarity. He opened his mouth again, maybe to apologize, maybe to rewrite. But I held up one hand. "You don't need to explain," I said. He hesitated. "Do you hate me?" "No," I said. "That would require remembering you as someone worth loving. It wasn't cruel, it was honest." He nodded once, walked away. I turned back to the painting I'd been admiring, an abstract landscape, wild brushstrokes over quiet chaos. It reminded me of something I once read: some fires burn loud, others burn long. Mine was the second kind, and it never needed to be seen, just survived.